A United States Navy guided missile destroyer drifted powerless in the South China Sea for 4 days last month, its air conditioning, galley, and freshwater systems dead in tropical heat until a commercial tugboat had to come tow it to port. I am Lambert Woollingham, and this is the Daily Shear for Tuesday, August 18th, 2026. Nobody woke me up special for this one, so we will proceed as if today were ordinary, which by the end of this broadcast will feel almost generous. Closer to home, Texas spent Monday proving that a scheduled vote is more of a suggestion than a guarantee in at least 2 different counties. This one picks up a fight we have been tracking. A Tarrant County judge halted the town of Westlake's vote on a data center just an hour before the council was set to approve it. Judge Kimberly Fitzpatrick signed a temporary restraining order Monday after homeowners near the proposed Circles T data center argued the town skipped required public notices during zoning proceedings. The council then voted unanimously to table its own resolution until an injunction hearing on August 26th, after more than 30 residents spent over 2 hours objecting to a 4-building complex that would sit about 500 feet from their backyards. Neighbors cited noise, strain on the power grid, and water demand. The mayor countered that the land is privately zoned for commercial use, regardless of what anyone thinks of it. The delayed agreement had called for developer Powerhouse Data Centers to pay $914,000 toward pump station upgrades, a fee now on hold along with everything else. San Antonio's City Council delivered its own version of a vote nobody gets to have, continuing a fight over funding for the new Spurs arena. Council members voted 5-6 on Monday to reject a proposal that would have put the city's $489 million financial commitment before voters in November. Mayor Gina Ortiz-Jones and 4 colleagues argued residents deserved a direct say on the money. The 6 who prevailed pointed to Bexar County's narrow 52% approval of its own $311 million share last November as sufficient public mandate. The decision leaves the city free to negotiate a binding agreement with Spurs Sports and Entertainment without ever putting the number in front of voters again. The team is still on the hook for $500 million of the estimated $1.3 billion venue, with the rest resting on bond debt, hotel taxes, and a tax increment zone most residents have never heard of. Austin's own council took a swing at its 911 dispatch system, voting to pull the call center out of the police department entirely and hand it to a brand new standalone city office. The plan authorizes more than $1 million and 4 initial administrative positions aimed at fixing response delays that council member Krista Lane says come from calls bouncing between overlapping city and county jurisdictions. The move passed over the formal objections of the police, fire, and emergency medical services chiefs, along with Mayor Kirk Watson, who argued that recruiting had already pushed call answer times above the 90% national standard. Backers of the change maintain that operational independence is the only permanent fix for a dispatch system that keeps losing calls at the boundary lines. The city now owns a 4th emergency department it did not have last week. Harris County, meanwhile, unveiled a $3.1 billion budget proposal that raises property taxes to the maximum rate allowed without triggering an automatic election. Budget Director Daniel Ramos told commissioners the county needs the increase to close a $181 million shortfall driven by healthcare costs, employee benefits, and inflation, pushing the overall rate from roughly 62.4 cents to 68 cents per $100 of valuation. That generates an estimated $218 million in new revenue, on top of $76 million in department cuts. $25 million from selling off surplus property, and $23 million clawed back from toll roads. County Judge Lena Hidalgo and the commissioners pointed to more than $300 million in employee salary adjustments and shrinking federal benefit allocations as the real pressure points. A median homestead owner can expect roughly $97 more a year once flood control assessments are added in, which is either a rounding error or a car payment, depending on who is doing the math. From local ledgers to the global kind, where the numbers get bigger and the deadlines get shorter. Washington and Ottawa spent Monday in a continuation of trade talks nobody expected to still be running this close to a deadline, trying to head off a 50% tariff on $20 billion of Canadian imports set to hit at midnight. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney called the negotiations delicate and declined to detail what, if anything, his side was willing to give up. The proposed tariffs would hit everything from timber to manufactured goods to medical supplies at a moment when roughly 72% of Canada's merchandise exports go directly to American buyers. Trade groups on both sides warned the duties would immediately inflate wholesale costs ahead of the autumn shipping season. Negotiators spent the day looking for carve-outs on automotive parts and energy products, the diplomatic equivalent of asking for a lighter sentence after the verdict has already been read. Federal court proceedings opened in Oakland in a multi-state trial accusing Meta platforms of deliberately engineering features to foster addiction and mental distress among children. Attorneys general from California, Colorado, Kentucky, and New Jersey are leading the case on behalf of 29 states, seeking civil penalties and mandatory changes to Instagram and Facebook. The complaint alleges Meta executives concealed internal research on behavioral harm and improperly collected data from users under 13 without parental consent. Judge Yvonne Gonzalez-Rogers is presiding over a bench trial expected to run 6 to 8 weeks, with testimony expected from Chief Executive Mark Zuckerberg himself. Meta denies the claims and says it has spent years building parental controls and screen time limits into the platforms. Anthropic disclosed that its annualized revenue run rate hit $65 billion at the end of July, up from $47 billion in May and just $9 billion at the end of last year. The company credits enterprise software integrations and model licensing for the jump, and it is now pacing towards somewhere between $100 billion and $120 billion by year's end. That growth is arriving just ahead of a planned initial public offering that underwriters think could value the company at $2 trillion or more, months after a funding round already put it at $965 billion. Rival OpenAI, not to be left out, doubled its own annual run rate to $40 billion, leaving two companies with no traditional profit margin racing to see who lists first at the bigger number. Nvidia announced a $1.5 billion direct equity stake in SB Energy to lock up sole supplier rights for the compute infrastructure at OpenAI's upcoming Ports Pike data center near Cincinnati. Regulatory filings show Nvidia is also backing the project with up to $105 billion in credit guarantees, financing a campus designed to scale from 4.25 gigawatts up to 8 gigawatts of dedicated computing power. SB Energy, a joint venture between SoftBank and OpenAI, plans to build its own 9.2 gigawatt natural gas power plant on land owned by the Department of Energy at an estimated cost of $33 billion. The generation project exists specifically so the data center never has to touch the local power grid at all. Equipment costs and turbine lead times are reportedly the only thing standing between OpenAI and a power plant it built purely to avoid asking anyone else for electricity. Brent crude climbed past $90 a barrel on Tuesday for the first time since late July, after the 2-month diplomatic window with Iran expired without a deal. Iranian officials threatened escalated military measures if talks collapse entirely, while the White House kept repeating its demand for unconditional surrender. The standoff continues to restrict tanker traffic through the Strait of Hormuz and drive up maritime insurance costs. Domestic retail gasoline hit an August high of $4.06 a gallon, and analysts say refiners are now stuck securing higher-cost alternatives with no immediate resumption of Gulf exports in sight. The added pressure lands right as transportation and logistics costs head into the autumn shipping season. Overseas and in the courts, jurisdiction was the word of the day, starting with a prosecutor who arguably never had any. A 3-judge panel on the Ninth Circuit ruled Monday that the Justice Department unlawfully installed Sigil Chetter as acting United States Attorney for the District of Nevada. The court affirmed a lower ruling finding the administration's circumvented statutory limits after Chatter's original 120-day interim appointment expired back in July of last year. Prosecutors had tried redesignating her as First Assistant U.S. Attorney under the Federal Vacancies Reform Act to keep her supervisory authority intact. The panel held that a first assistant can only automatically step into an acting role if they held that exact second-ranking post at the precise moment the vacancy opened, which disqualifies Chatter from 3 separate criminal cases she had been overseeing. The ruling now stands as binding circuit precedent, limiting how far the executive branch can stretch administrative reassignments to dodge Senate confirmation. The Supreme Court declined Monday to reconsider its own refusal to hear President Trump's appeal of E. Jean Carroll's $5 million civil judgment against him. His legal team had filed a rare petition for rehearing after the justices first turned the case away in June, and the court denied it with a summary order and no noted dissents. That makes the 2023 jury verdict, which found Trump liable for sexual abuse and defamation, final and unappealable, and Carroll's attorneys say the money he already paid into court custody this summer is no longer going anywhere else. A second and much larger judgment, $83 million, remains pending before the same court, where the administration is arguing presidential immunity should cover statements made while in office. The justices have not said whether they will even hear arguments on that one. Pakistan's Supreme Court ordered the immediate transfer of jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan from Adiala prison to a hospital in Islamabad, citing a medical review that found fluctuating blood pressure and cardiac irregularities after his prolonged confinement. A 3-judge bench also ordered an independent medical board, including Khan's personal physician and his sister, to oversee his treatment. He is expected to remain hospitalized through at least September 16th, his longest stretch outside prison walls since his 2023 incarceration on corruption charges. The court also directed prison officials to allow family visits at the hospital and let Khan speak by phone with his sons abroad. His party called the ruling a necessary step toward proper civilian care. Israeli aircraft carried out 8 airstrikes against the Abu al-Duhur military airbase in Syria's Idlib province early Tuesday, according to Syrian state media, heavily damaging the runway and surrounding tarmac without any reported casualties. It is the first direct aerial strike on that facility since the collapse of Bashar al-Assad's government, back in December of 2024. The airfield had mostly sat idle after years of damage changing hands during the civil war. Analysts describe the strike as part of a broader campaign against air defense sites, munitions depots, and runway infrastructure meant to keep Syria's new authorities from rebuilding any air combat capability. Israeli officials offered no public comment on the operation. The House Committee on Ethics opened a formal bipartisan investigation into California Representative Jimmy Gomez over allegations of inappropriate conduct with a congressional staffer. The inquiry follows public reporting questioning whether Gomez violated House rules governing supervisor-subordinate relationships, and he has since acknowledged personal mistakes outside his marriage while insisting the conduct was consensual and broke no law or chamber rule. The panel can issue subpoenas, review office communications, and depose witnesses, which watchdogs say could pull in additional lawmakers as witnesses, including former roommates and colleagues. It is the latest in a growing list of workplace conduct reviews the committee has opened this session. The guided missile destroyer United States ship Benfold lost all internal electrical power and propulsion for 4 days in the South China Sea after a major generator failure on July 24th. With the ship's grid down, air conditioning, galley operations, and freshwater systems went dark in tropical heat, leaving the crew to hold out until the cruiser USS Robert Smalls arrived with emergency rations. Commercial tugboats eventually towed the disabled Arleigh Burke-class warship to Subic Bay in the Philippines for repairs. Navy officials say no one was hurt and credited the crew's handling of the blackout, though they offered fewer details on the generator itself. The incident has added to congressional scrutiny of maintenance backlogs and equipment strain across the forward-deployed Pacific Fleet. I keep coming back to the natural gas plant OpenAI is building just so its data center never has to ask the actual power grid for anything. And once you start down that road, there is no natural stopping point. First, it is a dedicated power plant, so next it wants a dedicated pipeline, and then a dedicated town to put the pipeline in, and eventually a dedicated Ohio, at which point the rest of us are simply squatting near someone else's compute cluster, and hoping it does not need our water table too. I have to assume the actual sheep grazing near Cincinnati have no idea a 9.2 gigawatt turbine farm is about to become their new neighbor, and if I were one of them, I would start looking into whatever the ovine equivalent of a homeowners association is. Somewhere, there is an engineer diagramming exactly how much natural gas it takes to make sure a chatbot never experiences a brownout, and I do not think that engineer has been outside since May. The Circle T data center hearing is now scheduled for August 26th, which gives Westlake exactly 8 more days to find a public notice it apparently already missed the first time. I am going to go check on my own backup generator, since apparently even the Navy's version can quit for 4 days without notice. Lambert Woollingham, still fully powered for now. The day has been shorn. Until tomorrow.